So now that you understand the numbers, we need to talk about the thing quietly destroying all of them, your pricing. Because here's the dangerous part: bad pricing never feels broken, it in fact feels normal. That's why it can be so dangerous. And honestly, this is where a lot of appliance business owners I see getting trapped for years because they're working harder, they're running more calls, they're stacking more jobs and trying to grow while the entire business underneath is quietly leaking their money, their energy, their time, and their margin, all simultaneously. And if you watch the last video, you already know that ownership is a math problem, right? Well, pricing is one of the main levers controlling that math. So even if everything else looks busy, if this part is off, the whole machine starts struggling. And this is where it gets really interesting because the business can actually look busy or successful from the outside. The schedule's full, the phone's ringing, jobs are everywhere, and money's moving, but underneath, there's still a lot of pressure. There's still stress, still no room, and still no control. And eventually, you start asking, how am I working this much and it still feels this tight? That question usually leads back here to pricing. Now, before we go any deeper, in case you're new here and you don't know who I am, my name is Ray Hagler, founder of the Appliance Business Academy. And what I do is help appliance business owners stop building their company like they're still technicians and start building them like they're owners, because there's a completely different way to operate one of these businesses. And once you see it, you really can't unsee it anymore. I've spent years around the appliance repair business, a lot of service operators, and people building real companies at a very high level. People doing 8 and 9 figures annually. And what I've done is taking those higher level business principles, the stuff that never really gets taught in the trades, and I break it down into something simple, something appliance business owners can actually apply to their business. Because this isn't about more motivation or information. I'm talking about operational stuff. Your pricing, your margins, your daily production, your routing, your dispatch, your technicians, your capacity, and how to actually build a business that does not depend on your body every single day. Because once you understand the structure underneath everything, all of it begins to make more sense. Why the pressure exists, why your money feels tight, why the business still feels heavy even when you're busy. And that's exactly what we're breaking down in this video. Now, I want to show you something simple here because this is the part that finally makes a lot of things click. Let's say you run a job, right? Your customer's happy, you fix the appliance, and then you got paid. Everything feels fine to you at this moment, right? But then later, maybe as you're driving home or you're looking at the invoice later, you start to get that feeling like, man, that probably should have been more. That moment right there, that's usually where the leak starts. Not one giant mistake or not one huge disaster, just small underpricing that repeats over and over and over again. And because it happens so slowly, it feels harmless. $40 short here, $60 short there. We'll waive a fee here, help somebody out there. Nothing individually by itself feels massive, but now you stretch that out across a week, across a month, or even across a year. That's not a small leak anymore. It becomes thousands of dollars quietly disappearing from the business. And the worst part's this: you don't even feel it immediately, the leak. You feel the workload instead. You feel the pressure. You feel the exhaustion, but you don't always connect it back to your pricing. And that's why this keeps happening. Because when something feels normal, you stop questioning it, right? Now, let me ask you or show you this in another way. I want you to think about a bucket, and there's a tiny hole in the bottom. Not a massive hole, nothing dramatic, just a slow drip coming out of a tiny little hole. Now imagine trying to fill that bucket all day long with more calls, with more jobs, more effort, more running, and even more stress, but the hole never closes. So no matter how much you keep pouring into this bucket, nothing really holds. That's exactly what underpricing does. And this is why so many appliance business owners I see feel confused. Because from the outside, they're like, dude, I'm working, I'm moving. The business does look busy, but underneath, the structure still can't retain what's being earned. So the answer becomes for them, I'll just work harder and take more calls and push even longer. And eventually the business turns into a pressure system instead of a machine. And pressure systems always collapse, right? That's why you can have a completely full schedule and still feel broke, because revenue without structure creates the exhaustion, not freedom. And honestly, this is one of the biggest identity shifts inside of business. Technicians price emotionally while owners price structurally. That doesn't mean that owners don't care about people. It means they understand something different. If the business isn't healthy, nobody wins. Not the customer, not the technician, not the owner, not the future of the company, because eventually the pressure catches up. Now, this is where it gets really important for you, because some people watch a conversation like this and immediately think, so what? I should just start to charge a lot more? No, not exactly. That's not the lesson here. The lesson is this: your pricing has to support the structure, and that's different thinking. Because random pricing creates random outcomes. Owner pricing creates predictability, and predictability creates control. That's the sequential order. Now let's make this practical, because this is usually the point where somebody says, all right, Ray, I get it, but what does good pricing actually look like? And that's a fair question. And honestly, this is where everything starts slowing down mentally, because once pricing gets clear, the whole business starts breathing differently. So let me show you why. Imagine two different businesses. Business A is running eight calls a day. Low tickets, spread out routes, constantly rushing around, trying to squeeze everything in, while business B runs 4 solid jobs. Higher production, clean routing, better margins, same revenue, completely different pressure. That's the part that most owners miss, because the goal was never to become the busiest company. The goal was to build the most controlled one. That's a big difference. And this is why some appliance business owners I see feel trapped even when making decent money, because the money still requires all of their energy to exist. That's not leverage, that is dependency. And eventually your dependency creates exhaustion. Now, I was talking to a business owner recently. He's a great guy. He's a hard worker, and he's booked out constantly. And he told me, he said, Ray, I feel like I can never get ahead. And when we started looking at the numbers he's producing, it came obvious why. Everything was under pressure. He had low average tickets, way too many jobs, too much windshield time, no production target, no pricing structure, and no real margin control. So every week the business was surviving, but it wasn't building anything. And that's a dangerous place to be, because eventually you start thinking that the answer is more effort. I'll just have more hustle or even more grinding. But the issue isn't usually effort, it's structure. And that's the shift. And honestly, once pricing starts getting fixed, a lot changes quickly. Your schedule calms down, your routes get a lot cleaner, your production rises, and your margin improves. The business starts feeling less reactive. And this is where it gets really interesting again, because eventually you stop asking how many calls can we fit in, and you start asking what should this truck or each truck produce today. That's owner thinking. Now the business starts becoming more predictable instead of emotional, and predictable businesses can scale. Emotional ones burn people out. That's why this matters so much, because pricing is not just about charging more. Pricing determines how much pressure the business creates. Now, here's where the next shift really begins to happen, because even if your pricing gets fixed, if you don't know what one truck actually needs to produce per day, you'll still struggle to control your business. And this is where the day rate rule changes everything. Because once you know what one truck must produce daily, the math starts getting really clear for you. The scheduling gets clearer. The hiring gets clearer. The dispatch even gets clearer. Everything begins to organize itself around production. And that's exactly what I'm breaking down in the next video. And honestly, this is where a lot of things start changing. Because once you finally understand that pricing is connected to pressure, you stop looking at business the same way, really. You stop chasing random volume. You stop trying to work harder every time the numbers feel tight. And the business starts becoming more intentional, structured, predictable. Now, instead of squeezing in every possible call, you start protecting your production. Now, instead of reacting all day, you start directing the operation. Now, instead of feeling like the business owns you, you finally start feeling ownership. And that is the shift. And that's why I keep saying technicians solve problems, owners build machines, because machines don't run on emotion, they run on structure, and structure changes your ceiling. Now imagine this, you wake up on Monday, you check the schedule, and there's no panic. There's no chaos, no constant feeling that you're behind. You know what each truck needs to produce. You know how the pricing works. You know that the business is healthy. The routes are cleaner. The pressure drops. Your margin begins to improve. Your company starts operating without needing your body attached to every single part of it. That's where this thing starts to go. And if you're watching this and this is starting to click for you, then that's good, because this is the stuff that nobody is out here teaching appliance business owners. That is exactly why I built the Appliance Business Academy. It's not just more information, it's a structured build path that walks you through this step by step. It has math, pricing, production, your dispatch, your hiring, your margins, your system, and your path out of the truck. Because understanding this mentally is one thing, but actually installing it into your business is completely different. And that's what we do inside of the academy. So if you're serious about building a real business, not just staying busy, the link is below. Now, in our next video, I'm going to show you something powerful, the day rate rule. And honestly, this is where the math finally starts becoming real. Because once you understand what one truck must produce every single day, everything changes. I'll see you in the next video.